The chill of the evening was setting in as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the small town. Outside a rundown bar known for its rough clientele and rowdier nights, the neon sign flickered, struggling to stay alight against the encroaching darkness. It was here, on the outskirts of this forgettable part of town, that John Mac McCormack found his spot for the night. Nestled in an alcove near the bar's side entrance, Mac settled down, his belongings contained in a worn backpack that seemed as weathered as he was. Mac, at 45, carried the hard lines of a life lived on the edge of society. His face was etched with the marks of hardship, but his eyes retained the sharpness of a man who had once been a predator in the most dangerous environments imaginable. Once a Navy SEAL, Mac had seen things that would break most men. Now he lived in the shadows, a ghost of his former self, haunted by memories and driven by a desire to forget. The evening was just taking hold when the rumble of motorcycles shattered the quiet. The Reapers, a local biker gang known for their love of chaos and disdain for authority, pulled up in front of the bar. They came every Friday like clockwork, their presence a blight on the small community. As the gang dismounted, their laughter and jeers filled the air, a stark contrast to the somber silence of the evening. They were led by Vince, a hulking figure whose presence was as loud as his bike. Covered in tattoos and scars, Vince enjoyed the fear his appearance instigated among the locals. Mac watched from his secluded spot, his expression unreadable. He had dealt with men like Vince before, in circumstances far more volatile than a biker gang looking to stir up trouble. He knew the type well, bullies fueled by insecurity and a pack mentality. The gang entered the bar, their laughter echoing off the walls, but Vince paused, his eyes catching the slight movement of Mac adjusting his position. Sensing an opportunity to demonstrate his dominance, Vince motioned for his gang to wait. "Hey, old man, you can't camp here," Vince called out as he approached Mac. The sneer was evident in his voice as he towered over the seated figure, his gang forming a semicircle behind him. Mac looked up, his face shadowed by the hood of his worn jacket. "Just passing time, not causing trouble," he responded, his voice low and even, belying the tension that began to build in the air. Vince smirked, unimpressed. "Looks like you're asking for trouble, sitting here like you own the place." He kicked at Mac's backpack, sending it skittering across the concrete. "What's in the bag, Grandpa? Anything good?" Mac's eyes narrowed slightly, a flash of the old fire reigniting in their depths. He stood up slowly, his height nearly matching Vince's. "Nothing you'd want. Best move on." The gang laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. "Or what? You'll call the cops?" Vince taunted, stepping closer, his face inches from Mac's. "No," Mac said quietly, his gaze steady and piercing. "I'll handle it myself." The air seemed to thicken with tension, the bar's flickering neon light casting eerie shadows across the faces of the men. The bystanders near the bar's entrance watched with a mix of fear and anticipation, knowing that this confrontation was unlike the usual Friday night scuffles. Vince, sensing he might have underestimated the old man, laughed it off with a bravado he didn't quite feel. "Keep your trash then. Boys, let's get a drink." He turned back toward the bar, but the look he shot Mac was wary, the encounter leaving a mark on his confidence. As the gang moved away, Mac sat back down, his heart beating a familiar rhythm of adrenaline and control. He picked up his backpack, checking its contents for damage. Inside, nestled among the few possessions he cherished, was a faded photograph of a younger version of himself, dressed in military gear, surrounded by his team. His past life, a life of significance and skill, reduced now to memories. Mac's eyes lingered on the photo, a reminder of who he was and what he still could be. As the night grew darker and the sounds of revelry spilled out from the bar, Mac settled back against the wall, a lone sentinel in a world that had forgotten him, but who had not forgotten how to survive. As the night wore on, the bar became a cacophony of raucous laughter and clinking glasses, a stark contrast to the silent vigil Mac maintained outside. The bikers, fueled by alcohol and a growing sense of invincibility, spilled out of the bar intermittently, their rowdiness escalating with each round they consumed. Vince, now visibly inebriated but still simmering from the earlier confrontation, could not shake the unsettling encounter with Mac. As he rejoined his gang outside for a smoke, his eyes sought the lone figure huddled in the alcove. The more he thought about it, the more his wounded pride goaded him into action. "Let's have a bit of fun," he slurred, a malicious grin spreading across his face as he gestured towards Mac. The gang, eager to follow their leader's lead, gathered around, a pack of hyenas circling a perceived threat. They approached Mac, who appeared to be dozing, his head bowed and his body wrapped in an old, weather-beaten coat. "Hey, Grandpa, we're not done with you yet," Vince barked, nudging Mac roughly with his boot. "Time to show us what you got in that bag of yours." Mac's response was slow but deliberate. He raised his head, and the look in his eyes was like flint striking steel, a sharp, hard glint that made even the drunken Vince pause. "Boys, you don't want to do this," Mac warned, his voice low and resonant, carrying an authority that silence had long concealed. Ignoring the warning, one of the younger bikers, spurred on by the gang's momentum, reached down to grab Mac's backpack. In a flash, Mac's hand shot out, his grip iron tight on the biker's wrist. With a swift motion, he twisted the arm just enough to make the biker yelp in pain and drop to his knees. The sudden display of strength and precision sobered the gang momentarily. Vince, his face red with a mixture of anger and embarrassment, stepped forward, throwing a punch that he was sure would put Mac in his place. But Mac was already moving, his body swaying with the fluidity and grace of a trained combatant. He sidestepped the punch effortlessly, his own fist connecting with Vince's midsection in a controlled but powerful blow that knocked the wind out of the gang leader. The fight, if it could be called that, was over as quickly as it had begun. Vince doubled over, gasping for air, his gang members frozen in shock. Mac stood over him, his breathing even and controlled, a stark contrast to the heaving breaths of his opponent. "Learned that a long time ago, in a place far worse than this," Mac stated, his tone matter of fact. He picked up his backpack and slung it over his shoulder, his eyes sweeping over the gang with a clear message. They were no longer a threat to him. As Mac started to walk away, the reality of who they had just confronted began to dawn on the bikers. Whispers of Navy SEAL and veteran rippled through the group, turning their bravado into a sheepish, sullen retreat. Vince, still recovering and now humbled, watched as Mac disappeared into the night. The encounter had started as a game, but ended as a lesson they would not soon forget. As Mac walked away from the bar, the cold night air seemed to clear his mind, the adrenaline slowly ebbing from his veins. His heart still pounded with a rhythm reminiscent of distant battlefields, yet the streets around him were quiet. The silence a stark contrast to the chaos he had just left behind. Behind him, the bar's neon sign flickered intermittently, casting a surreal glow over the scene of the confrontation. Vince and his gang, now subdued and reflecting on the unexpected defeat, lingered outside. The realization that they had harassed a former Navy SEAL, a man trained to survive and thrive in the harshest conditions imaginable, had instilled a new sense of respect and, perhaps, a touch of fear. As the gang dispersed, whispers about Mac's true identity spread like wildfire through the small town. By morning, the story had evolved and expanded, shrouded in the kind of lore that often accompanies tales of unexpected heroism. Meanwhile, Mac found a quiet spot under an old bridge where the sounds of the river helped drown out the ringing in his ears, a lingering reminder of the confrontation. Sitting alone with his thoughts, he pulled a worn photograph from his wallet. The picture, faded and creased, showed a younger version of himself in full military regalia, surrounded by his squad. His fingers traced the faces of his fallen comrades, a silent tribute to the sacrifices that haunted him. His solitude was interrupted by the soft approach of footsteps. Mac tensed, ready to defend himself again, but as he looked up, he saw a familiar face. It was Jessie, a waitress from the bar, carrying a steaming cup of coffee and a sandwich. "I saw what happened," Jessie said, her voice soft, betraying a mix of concern and admiration. "You didn't deserve that. No one does." Mac took the offered food, his gruff exterior softening slightly. "Thanks," he murmured, his eyes not meeting hers. "It's been a long time since anyone stood up for me." Jessie sat beside him, her presence a quiet statement of solidarity. "People around here, they talk," she continued. "They don't know the half of what you've been through, but maybe after tonight, they'll think twice before judging." The conversation shifted slowly from the night's events to Mac's past, a narrative he rarely shared. Jessie listened intently as Mac spoke of distant lands, of comrades lost and battles won, and of the war within that drove him from the life he once knew. As dawn broke over the town, casting a gentle light on the bridge, Mac felt a weight lift slightly from his shoulders. The act of sharing his story, coupled with the respect he had earned, brought a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. Jesse eventually stood, ready to head back to work, but not before giving Mac a reassuring smile. "You're not alone," she said simply. "Not anymore." Mac watched her go, the warmth of the coffee seeping through his hands. As the town woke to a new day, he considered Jesse's words. Perhaps it was time to reconnect, to find a way back from the shadows where he had dwelled for too long. As the narrative closed, Mac packed up his few belongings and walked back toward the town. With each step, he felt less like a ghost, more present in the world he had left behind. The respect he had earned that night, born from a confrontation he never wanted, had sparked a change, a possibility of redemption, and a new chapter waiting to be written.